Thank you so much for joining us for today's Technology Enhanced Teaching and Learning Institute webinar titled Smart Start, Leveraging Technology to Detect and Support Learning Differences Early. And so earlier this year, CGLR hosted a series of GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars on the most recent NAEP results. These sessions aim to unpack and clarify what the nation's report card, as it's known, told us about students' academic achievement as we continue to undo the harm caused by pandemic-precipitated school closures back in 2020 and 2021. GLR has also had a long commitment to exploring and understanding what it takes to ensure students who learn differently do not fall through the cracks and instead receive the special instruction and qualified teachers that their unique needs call for. So we were dismayed to learn that students with learning differences saw an ongoing drop in their reading performance on the nation's report card. A whopping 72% of fourth graders with disabilities, including those with a 504 plan, scored below basic on NAEP in 2024. In their assessment, NAEP considers students with disabilities as those who may need specially designed instruction to meet their learning needs. So this specially designed instruction has long included what is known as assistive technology, which began with simple things such as a magnifying glass or talking calculators. And as we all know, in the year 2025, assistive technology, or EdTech, for students with learning differences has come a very long way. And schools across the United States saw an influx of education technology, or EdTech, in the wake of the pandemic aimed at accelerating equitable learning recovery. So now there is much to learn about how the post-pandemic investment and the recent developments in technology are being deployed specifically to support students with learning differences and how these tech tools are leading to improved and updated instruction. Many leaders in the technology-enhanced teaching and learning space have been investigating and demonstrating how important new modes of education technology are for students with varying types of learning disabilities. This holds especially true when using EdTech to identify and assist teaching and learning for students with dyslexia, ADHD, or other neurodivergent conditions. We are very excited to have brought together today a panel of these leaders, researchers, and experts to review the tech tools and practices that are proven effective for use by teachers in the classroom or for parents at home in ways that advance the learning success for students who learn differently. And today we are extremely lucky to have a leading voice in technology tools for struggling young readers as our moderator. Carla Small was co-founder of Early Bird Education with Dr. Nadine Gabb, who's also a panelist today, and she is now CEO of Sprout Labs, which provides an AI-powered personalized reading assistant for the whole family to take the anxiety out of the reading learning journey, something she is passionate about as the mom of a child with dyslexia. And now I'm honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed panelists with us today in alphabetical order. Please note that full bios have already been linked in the chat, so I'm just previewing who we have with us today. Dr. Nadine Gabb, PhD, is an associate professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the director of the Gabb Lab. Gabb Lab. Her work focuses on typical, atypical learning trajectories from infancy to adolescence with an emphasis on language and reading development within a learning disabilities framework. Louis Lord Nelson, PhD, is an internationally recognized Universal Design for Learning, UDL leader, a best-selling author, podcaster, CAST postdoctoral fellow, and the recipient of CAST's inaugural Ann Meyer Design Award in 2024. Louis is also a former special education teacher who also led UDL implementation at the district level. Ola Ozernov-Palchik, PhD, is a research assistant professor at Boston University Wheelock College of Education and Human Development and at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research at MIT and core faculty at the AI in Education Initiative. Her multidisciplinary research centers on the cognitive neuroscience of language and literacy development. Glenna Wright Gallo is Vice President of Policy at Everway, a global technology company dedicated to unlocking everyone's full potential. In this role, she leverages her extensive experience in special education to drive impactful policy changes and shape innovative solutions. Tina Zambitella is starting her 15th year at AIM and is AIM's Director of Curriculum and Instruction. She began her journey at AIM as a student teacher while attending Westchester University, where she received her Bachelor's of Science in Special Education. What a powerhouse panel. We are so happy to welcome you and we look forward to engaging with you and learning from you. And now I'm very excited to turn it over to Carla Small.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'd actually like to start with a story. The story of Ava, an adorable 5-year-old who in her 10th day of kindergarten got to play a fun game on her tablet. Simultaneously, the school reading specialist was reviewing the data from Ava's gameplay on the dashboard and determined in the moment and with great confidence that Ava was at risk for dyslexia. She then creates an instructional plan and implementation plan so that Ava, by October, is showing great progress on her way to overcoming reading challenges. Now, October, isn't that typically in a kindergarten class when we might just be beginning to learn that that child is learning differently than the other in the classroom? I also recently spoke to that reading specialist, and she shared that 100% of the children in that cohort, and they're all in second grade now, are reading on grade level, an unprecedented accomplishment in that district, but one made possible with technology coupled with strong instruction. That's a story about Early Bird, where as CEO and co-founder, I oversaw the development and extensive research validation at Boston Children's before we launched it into schools nationwide. That's the goal of all of this, isn't it? An EdTech tool that excels across design, development, testing, implementation hurdles, and is used for good for children nationwide. This is the outcome we all want to see, but there are so many layers and steps to achieving this, and concerns and considerations. That's why I'm so excited about this panel today. We will touch on the many aspects of this: the research basis from Nadine and Ola, learning design for diverse learners from Louis, implementation pragmatism and adoption at the school level from Tina, and innovative EdTech tools from Glenna. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are very aware that we have a panel of white women. With this group of people, we do have a broad diversity of perspectives, with our speakers representing the queer community, foreign countries, and other aspects that offer multicultural and distinctive points of view. But we can see the lack of people of color on the panel, and we want to make sure that you know that we did invite leaders of color, but unfortunately they were not available today. We're missing that voice and are disappointed they weren't able to join us. Now let's turn to our panelists. So I have a question for each panelist. We'll hear from each of them their answer to that question, and in answering that question, they'll share context around the focus of their work before we move on to a full panel discussion. So I'd like to start with Nadine. Nadine, I know you have a powerful framework for us in education, borrowing from healthcare, known as preventative education. Can you tell us more about this? And also, please share what you've been working on recently, including that exciting new study just featured in the Harvard Gazette last week that is so pertinent for today's conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited. So we've been for years now working on a shift from a reactive to a proactive model in the field of education. And let me, explain this to you. So as a society, we embrace preventative medicine. Right. So we all love to take our vitamins in the morning, maybe, skip the elevator and take the steps, maybe get a mammogram, maybe get vaccinated, etc. And the goal is to prevent getting sick, maybe prevent going to the cardiologist, a specialist, etc. However, in the field of education, we are not really embracing the proactive preventative lens. What we are not doing is to identify children at risk for developing problems with reading, math, or other important aspects of learning, and then making sure they get help and they have everything they need in their learning setting in order to prevent that they ever enter special education. And so in my lab, we work both on basic science as well as applied tools in order to enable this proactive lens. And that includes developing tools like early bird education, a screening tool based on years of research, also developing tools like pediatric screeners for pediatricians that could be used for a quick 2-minute screen, but also basic research. And we just published a study where we tracked infants all the way to second grade. We were wondering, when do these learning trajectories in the brain actually diverge between kids who later develop problems versus not? And we were even surprised, showing that some of these trajectories in certain brain areas important for learning to read are different already in infancy, but also some, start diverging around 18 months, really suggesting that some kids start with a less optimized brain for learning to read. That doesn't mean they can't learn to read, but we need to really find them early.
That's exciting. And Nadine, can you talk a little bit more about how that has to do with education technology in terms of the way you're seeing the learning trajectory move in a different direction as early as 18 months? And what does that mean for technology across the spectrum of ages?
Yeah, so we've been really assisting many different groups in pushing through these screening laws in the U.S. So where we actually find kids early, but you can have all the laws in the world if you can't implement it well and you don't have good measurement tools, it's kind of useless. And so I think where EdTech plays a really important role is that we can actually that it can actually help us to enable us to screen many kids at once without a one-on-one setting, without actually being data literate, where you have to like calculate and look up in tables, whether this child is at risk or not, but the technology can tell you right away. And most importantly, it's fun. All the kids do the same, so it's not like we pull out one, but the others are not. And it's in a playful way. And most importantly, it tells you right away who may be at risk and what you can do about it. And I think this is, where, I'm really excited about, because for the first time, we can actually scale this up and actually do this in a way where it's not biased, where, everyone gets the same. And it's not like, some implicit bias where maybe someone asked a question in the wrong way, or the child, understands it differently based on their background. No, everyone gets the same, technology, and it's a much, straightforward approach.
Yeah. And I know that was one of the exciting breakthroughs when you were innovating the early bird concept, was that it would be for pre-readers, it would be fun, and it would be engaging. And it was pretty incredible at that time. Let me move on then to ask Ola to build on what Nadine has been sharing with us. What more can you tell us about research-backed and evidence-based technologies, and what are you seeing among those that are really making a difference for early screening and early learning?
Thank you for this question. So as Nadine mentioned, the goal of early screening is to identify risk for disability, and then how, hopefully give kind of preventative support for the child not to develop the symptoms of something like reading failure, which is failing to learn how to read as expected by about, third grade, and then really have lifelong struggle with reading difficulties. And so I would say that the space of technology-based screeners is the space where there's the most evidence and research-based evidence in terms of effectiveness. There have been studies that comparing like a technology-based screener with a paper pencil screener in terms of like the ease of administration, of engagement, showing that they have equal predictive validity, but for example, fewer scoring errors on a technology-based. I think we're still not there in terms of kind of this implementational issue. So we recently conducted a survey of educators administering universal screening for literacy in K through second, and really asked them kind of a range of questions related to implementation. And what we found is that there's quite a bit of variability, both in terms of training that educators receive, how to administer even technology-based screeners accurately, in terms of knowing how to interpret the data that's coming out of the screeners, knowing how to tackle issues related to, for example, if a child that's coming from is a language learner and makes an error on the screener, do we count it as correct or incorrect, for example? So of course, as Nadine mentioned, there's a huge issues of bias in early screening. And so this is something that we know could be an issue, not knowing how to score. And so basically, we're not there yet. We have the technology, but we still need to know how to administer it, how to score it. So there's quite a bit of gap still to kind of to be optimal in terms of identifying children at risk. Also, kind of the accuracy of identification on those screeners is still also suboptimal, so we still kind of need to kind of bridge that gap. We at MIT, in collaboration with other teams, are trying to develop speech-based technologies that would allow kind of this even more automatic screening and scoring. So using speech, which potentially having, and we found, for example, we did a crowdsourcing competition with speech data collected from a screener developed by Yakov Patcher at Florida State University. And so using that screening data, we train machine learning algorithms, not us actually, it was a crowdsourcing effort. So our, people who participate in the competition, and they found that, training those algorithms on the child speech data really resulted in a high accuracy of scoring assessment items from items that are the most commonly administered in those screeners, suggesting that machine learning has this huge potential to to do accurate, reliable, and importantly, non-biased scoring of child speech data. Another example, so I would say, again, in the screening domain, I think we're doing pretty well in terms of gathering evidence and improving and moving the needle on those literacy crises that Emily described earlier on. Intervention is a bit more trickier. And of course, the pipeline from screening to intervention is more tricky and is very tricky as well. So we know that many educators don't know what to do with the data that they get from the screeners and how do they individualize intervention based on the screening data. We know that even if they know how to do it, they often don't have the resources to do it. And this is where I believe that AI and, really educational technology has a huge potential in terms of knowing how to individualize, how to interpret data, how to potentially visualize data, and really augment effective instructional practices in the classroom. And I can give you kind of an example from how we are trying to take an intervention study that we conducted with human tutors using educational technology and try to kind of scale it by potentially using AI. So I don't know if I have time for that. Do I? Okay, thumbs up. Okay, great. And so during the COVID pandemic, actually it was before the pandemic, we kind of had an idea at MIT with John Gabrielli and Haley Olson, who was a PhD student at the time. We had an idea of conducting an intervention to improve children's vocabulary knowledge. And the reason we focus on vocabulary knowledge, because it's one of those really, number one things that really differentiate children as early as kindergarten based on their disadvantaged backgrounds or disabilities. And the gaps in vocabulary knowledge really widen throughout the years of education. And so we wanted to target vocabulary knowledge. It was supposed to be a neuroimaging study. We partnered with Learning Ally that provides text-supported audiobooks for children with disabilities, because we know that children with disabilities, specifically children with dyslexia, don't have access to rich content and language-rich content as well, because of their kind of impairments with word-level decoding skills. So they can't really read very rich books. And so as a one way to kind of support that, you can provide audiobooks to them. And Learning Ally started way before audiobooks were a thing. And so they did human read books. And so anyways, we partnered with them. The pandemic hit, and we knew that, we know that those gaps are there early on. We know that those gaps affect children from disadvantaged backgrounds. We know that summers tend to widen gaps. And so we really decided that it's even more urgent that we implement that study. And we implemented the study fully remote with children from 3rd and 4th grade. This was about 300 children. We had about 100 children in each group. One group received access to mindfulness app. One group received access to Learning Ally, and another group received access to Learning Ally plus human-led tutoring sessions twice a week, 20 minutes. And our tutors were undergraduate students from MIT and Wellesley College who were doing it out of their dorms and, this again at the height of the pandemic, out of their houses. And our students were students across the country. Really, we had a really wide sample from different backgrounds. And what we found is for many students, just giving them access to Learning Ally, we curated the books for them. We created the library based on their language skills. So we measured the language skills in the beginning, and we curated the library of books to kind of be like just above their level of comfort and to be challenging for them. So for some students, just having access to those books and to the service, particularly for students with disadvantaged backgrounds, improve their vocabulary knowledge from pre-test to post-test. For children with disabilities, just having access was not sufficient. And so those children really improved in the group, like really improved and benefited from this explicit one-on-one, highly individualized instruction provided by our human tutors. And we thought, great, this is like a really scalable model because we have undergrads, not very specialized teachers. We can do it fully remotely, so we can access children from a variety of geographical locations, not just kids in Boston around MIT and Harvard and BU. And so it's a very scalable model. But then we realized that we can make it even more scalable, right? If we are, and this is when AI started to really explode, if we can actually use AI-based tutoring, right? We don't know if it's going to be effective, but let's try. And so we're building a platform to try to replicate basically what the human tutors were doing. And we're doing it very slowly because we really believe that before we put any tool into the hands of kids, it has to be validated and well-researched, and we need to know that it's an effective tool. And so we are proceeding slowly. We have a platform developed. It's agentic AI. It teaches children vocabulary knowledge in the context of read alouds. We conducted an online study where we basically compared human versus AI tutor responses to the actual sessions from that other empirical study to see, and we asked people who were blind, they didn't know that there's AI responses in there, to basically rate the responses based on effectiveness and engagement and adaptability to students. And we found that basically both just random adults and educators rated the AI responses higher than the human responses. So that supports the, our kind of like one step closer to knowing, okay, like AI can potentially respond adequately and properly and in pedagogically effective way to students. And then kind of our gold, standard at the end of this is going to be to conduct a fully randomized controlled trial comparing our AI-based tutor to a human tutor to see what is the added, first of all, is it effective? Are children engaged? What are the different kind of barriers and facilitator of implementation of this technology? And most importantly, what is the added value? Is it adding anything beyond the human tutor?
That is incredible. Thank you, Ola, for sharing that. And I think, we'll move on later in the full panel discussion to talk more about AI. But there is this big question about the human in the loop, right? And where do you leave the human touch, and where can you move away from the human with confidence? And in some of your data showing maybe even greater results. So that'll be fun to continue this conversation. So powerful what you all are doing. All right, I'd like to ask Tina now. Tina is here, and we're so lucky to have her representing AIM as a true research to practice organization. Tell us, Tina, how does this work? How are you implementing strategies based on the research that we're hearing about? And also maybe tell us a little bit about ROAR and how you are using AI in your example, and how tech can be paired with teacher professional development.
Great, that's a great question. So my name is Tina Zampatel. I'm the Director of Curriculum Instruction at AIM Academy, but I'm always a teacher first, so I take the teacher lens with everything that we do. AIM Academy is a school for students with language-based learning disabilities. It was started by two moms that didn't want to wait 10 to 20 years for the research to hit the classroom. So we have a dual mission. We provide an extraordinary educational opportunity for students, and then also develop a Center for Educational Excellence and Professional Development, because we know how important that professional development is to supporting our students. So our focus is more on empowering lives through literacy. So as I said, we the two founders of our school started because of the research, which is not making its way into the classroom. So how do we do that now, right? Like, how are we collecting and sharing the research? How does that get into the classroom? Well, I think that this connection with ROAR, I think we should start with assessment. So as we were talking about early assessment, students must be assessed and screened for reading difficulties starting in the early grades. This is something that we all know and have continued to push, which is why we're here today, but we know that it's not happening because there are huge barriers to assessment. Time, resources, right? Time to complete the assessment, score the assessment, find someone that can give the assessment even. I think Dr. Gab said data illiterate was what those words that I wrote down, right? Like you're spend more time teaching how to assess a student than to taking the data. So enter Jason Yateman and his team from Stanford University. They have solved all of the world's problems by creating ROAR. So ROAR, ROAR, is the rapid online assessment of reading, and it's used to assess the foundational reading skills. And it also can be used as a dyslexia screener. And it is an online assessment that replaces resource-intensive and time-consuming assessment practices. It's gamified, it's fully automated. You don't need a proctor or an assessor, right? Instructions are read to the students by the computer. It's open source and open access and open to anyone that wants to use it. If you want to work with the team at Stanford, you can go online and fill out a form. It's available for anybody. And really the idea about ROAR is that you can assess an entire school or even an entire district in the time it used to take to assess one student. And I think that's really powerful because now we're able to collect so much more data. So we started at AIM, started using ROAR 3 years ago. And I think what I can say is we started out slowly, right? So each year we build more grades that we are assessing, and we're using benchmark periods, but we have collected the data at the phoneme, word, and sentence level, which has been really helpful with programming and interventions. So we collected the data, we analyzed the data, we determined the students' needs, but then what? Do all teachers typically know what to do right away? No, they're not sure. They haven't received appropriate teacher training on how to directly practice these skills. So then we have AIM Pathways. So our AIM Pathways courses really focus on the science of reading. And if you look at all of the ROAR assessments, we can directly align the ROAR assessments with modules in Pathways to Proficient Reading. So if a student does poorly on the phoneme assessment in ROAR, teachers can complete the Pathways phonological awareness section, right? This section will offer the latest research and classroom practices. So we've been able to use assessment and teacher training and really connect that to support our students. So, yep. So we connect assessment, evidence-based practices, teacher training, and ROAR. They have new assessments that they're adding yearly. There's always something new. Now they have math assessments even, but yeah, it's been very interesting. And we have learned a lot about our students.
Yeah, that's incredible. The fact that you're implementing this with such fidelity, which is such an important piece of taking technology into an environment. Thank you, Tina. And I'm sure we'll come back to hear more about some of your learnings.
Great.
So
Thank you.
I'd like to ask Louis now. Louis is an expert in universal design for learning, and please help us understand what that is and as an approach and an instructional methodology, how that's particularly impactful for children with various learning differences.
Absolutely. So first, I'll just start off with an analogy to help everybody get their brain wrapped around what universal design for learning is. So if we think about the recipient of the design, let's pretend you're walking into a buffet. So next slide, please. If you walk into a buffet, you know that the goal that's there is for you to have a really good meal. And let's say you walk into this restaurant and all the tables are so well placed. They're nice and far apart. Everybody can move around. The lighting is great. You don't have to use your phone light to see what's in front of you. The sound is perfect. You can actually talk to the person at the table next to you. You don't have to yell. Maybe there's a little bit of music, but the ambiance is great. And then when you go up to get your food, You know that you're supposed to have this great dining experience, but you came in with your own goals. So maybe you came in with an intolerance to a certain food or an allergy, or maybe just a preference, or maybe you have just a dietary concern. Like I'm not eating as much chocolate right now, right? So I would look for something else. But you walk up and you realize there's this nice buffet, but it's not overwhelming. There's just something there, it seems like, for everybody, and all the food is labeled, so you know what's in there. You have the information that you need to really guide your own experience. All right, so let's think about this from a flip side of that, and that's the designer. And that's the next slide. So the designer is the person who created the buffet. And this designer said, you know what? I want everybody to come to my buffet. I want everyone to feel good here, feel welcomed here, and know that they are going to get what they need here. So I'm going to make sure my tables are far enough apart so we don't have any mobility issues. I'm going to make sure that the sound isn't too loud. I'll put up nice little silencing panels here and there, and that way people can talk with one another and not yell. I'm going to put together some ways for the lighting to be great so nobody feels like, oh, it's too harsh, or they could just see. I'm going to make sure my food is labeled. All of these things that my recipient was receiving. But you know why I did that? Is because I want to be able to think ahead, A, to serve everybody I can, but then B, if other new things show up, I can attend to those things. I've already designed up front what I know the majority of people are going to need. So now if something does come up, I'm not scrambling around, worrying. All right. So there's our analogy for universal design for learning. We would just take that into the classroom. Something that people are used to seeing is this graphic organizer that's on your screen. Now, there are a lot of words that are not there, and that's on purpose because this can be overwhelming to look at for people. But what I want you to know is that the information that's in this graphic organizer, which you have a link to a digital version of this, which then takes you deeper into explanations and information. These are the ideas and actions that you would take when you are designing those environments or those learning experiences. A learning experience can be a lesson or a unit. It can be just one of those offhand teaching moments out into the classroom. It can be a meeting if you're an administrator. But the point of all of this is because we are promoting learner agency. We want our learners to be more in charge of what they are doing so they can reach that goal. So not only the goal of the lesson, the stated goal, but also what do they want to achieve? That's what we're moving toward. Now, you're thinking, wow, there's a lot in here. Louie, I can't even see the words, but I can tell there's a lot going on here. So I'm going to use another analogy. And that analogy is of a sunset. So on my next slide, I got a little picture of a sunset. But what I want you everybody to do, think of two sunsets. Two sunsets you've experienced. All right. Now, were they identical? I'm betting not. So if you were looking at the sunset, they were probably vastly different. The environment around you made a difference. The weather, who you were with, maybe what was going on, your mood, all of these things are part of context. So why do I use this analogy? It's because the UDL framework, those guidelines, that's the sunset of what we have every day. The sun sets every day. The world turns. We got a little bit of an axis thing, but the world turns and the sun disappears. Same thing every day. But what changes is the context. And that's why it looks and feels different every day. So what I've done over the last few years is I've put together a podcast called UDL in 15 minutes. I have the 138th episode will drop tomorrow. And these are educators sharing their experiences with UDL. I have educators from Malawi and Nigeria and Canada, and of course, the United States, because that's where I live, and all over Europe. And you can hear their stories, short, brief, and get a feel for it. So that's my quick introduction to universal design for learning for everybody. And you have lots of resources to learn more.
Thank you, Louis. So insightful and interesting. And I can see there are many, many, many applications of this across the breadth, but what an exciting framework to use when thinking about new technologies in the classroom. So I'm sure we'll come back to that as well. So now, Glenna has an incredible background, and it would be great if you could share your lens of policy and accessibility from your experience at the U.S. Department of Education in relation to the science of reading, UDL, and what children who learn differently need. And also tell us what's coming up at Everway in terms of the frontiers of math literacy and your forthcoming guide on access to funding for acquiring technology.
Great, thank you so much. I'm delighted to join you today to really talk about how policy, accessibility, and evidence-based frameworks all work together and how we need to make sure that that happens to support every learner, including those who learn differently. I am the Vice President of Policy at a new Center of Excellence for Everway. Prior to this, I was the Assistant Secretary of Education at the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, or OSERS. Before that, I ran state special ed programs in multiple states, and before that, I was a teacher. And so as we've talked about on here, right, once a teacher, always a teacher. But one of the things that I think I'm really passionate about and that has come through in our conversation today is that our classrooms, our workforce, and our communities are becoming increasingly diverse, and we're facing tighter budgets, right? We have tighter budgets, we have fewer funds, we have educator shortages, we have some limited capacity to take on additional work, yet the needs of our students are greater than ever. And so this is an urgency that I think we all feel. Drawing on my experience at the U.S. Department of Education and throughout my career, I've seen firsthand that policy has to connect research with practical real-world solutions. And so we know that our classrooms really reflect the diversity of our world, different backgrounds, languages, abilities, and learning styles. But our educators and our staff all have those same needs, right? Different styles, diversity, learning needs. And we're being asked to do more with fewer resources. So what I want to do is really build upon what some of my colleagues have presented on here and talk about some of the latest tools that are coming out, as well as how we can really dig into some of those resources. So Lou talked to us about a universal design for learning, the proactive framework that addresses learner variability by providing multiple means of representation. We also have talked in some detail about the science of reading. And we know that most of the country now has laws about science of reading and literacy instruction. But for students who have dyslexia, those who are learning English, structured decoding isn't enough. And I know that the science of reading goes beyond decoding, but I think that we get stuck there a lot of times. Research has shown us that text-to-speech tools can boost comprehension by almost 25% for students whose main barrier is decoding, making that grade level content accessible and reducing fatigue and frustration. One of Everway's tools that they have out there that supports this is Read and Write. It's more than an accommodation. It's an essential aid that can help increase reading volume, boost motivation and confidence. So while the gains are strongest that we're seeing for students with decoding challenges, it also supports a broader range of learners, including those with attention differences or who process digital text less effectively. I'm going to talk about a couple other tools that Everway has available, but I also want to take a quick step back and just talk about accessible instructional materials. So we know that just like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, we also have Section 508 around accessibility compliance. But one of the things that we're seeing is that when people are purchasing materials and instructional materials, based on the bureaucracy of the procurement process, they don't always think about that accessibility component on the front end and build it into the procurement process. So it's really critical that we're looking at how do we coordinate funding streams to scale those accessible tools. And then how do we make sure that our procurement processes and policies require those accessibility standards from the start, ensuring that the tools are born accessible and work for everyone, that we're not having to spend time and money retrofitting things. And I think that all of us have been in an example where that has happened before, right? Where we were giving technology or a tool that didn't meet our needs or didn't meet the needs of the students that we were working with. So accessible solutions reduce those long-term expenses and do what we expect them to do, which is really to support the learning needs of all students. Part of that is being able to personalize it, right? So students need to be able to adjust the voice, the speed, be able to highlight things. They need to be able to receive explicit instruction on how to use the tools, and not just the students, but the educators themselves. And I think this goes without saying, and yet I'm going to say it again, but ongoing support and explicit instruction are just as important as the technology itself. It's not about replacing a teacher. It's about supplementing quality, effective, evidence-based instruction with accessible tools. I hope we're all aware of the 2025 NCTQ report that identified persistent math gaps. And it's pointing out that most of our states do not have strong standards around math instruction like we do around the science of reading. So we are seeing some persistent inequities around that, especially as we know that early math proficiency is foundational for long-term STEM success. Technology is another way to help bridge those barriers. When we think about AI, artificial intelligence, driven communications, diagnostics, tutoring, culturally responsive design, a lot of the tools and resources have built-in translation. I know that the Everway products can do up to 100 languages. And then hybrid delivery models, really allowing flexible self-paced learning. Everway has tools such as the read and write that I've talked about, Equatio, which is used for math formulas, Orbit Notes, which looks at how do we take and adjust formatting, be able to read aloud, be able to change the way our notes are taken and how we adjust them. All of these tools, right, built from an accessibility standpoint, really support student learning. They're interoperable, they work across platforms, and they support multilingual learners. This is all about making sure that every student can access and participate fully in learning at grade level, regardless of their specific needs. We already talked about the research, right? The 24% improvement in comprehension. But it's also important to note that the research is showing that these tools can be the most effective in meeting the needs of all students. And so Everway has this term that I really like, which is necessary for some, but beneficial for all. And I love the way that we look at the world thinking about that. I just want to hit on something that's coming up really quickly, but we have a funding playbook that's coming out that really talks about sustainable investments in accessible technology. It gives you actionable strategies, combining multiple funding streams for flexibility, sequencing resources in a planned way, and coordinating with partners, and identifying less commonly used resources such as labor, health, and private grants, which is especially important as our federal recovery funding wanes and we're seeing some budget cuts. We need to make sure that as we move forward, we spend our time and our resources and our attention on evidence-based strategies. And I really appreciate the fact that we're focused on that today. And we're recognizing that accessible technology is not just an accommodation, it's a gateway to grade level content and lifelong learning. By integrating universal design for learning, science-based instruction, and accessible procurement and technology, we can build a system where every learner thrives. Please connect with me on LinkedIn if you have information or you'd like more information on that funding playbook, which can help you demystify funding and really look at how to sustainably acquire these tools moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenna. I do love that quote, necessary for some, beneficial for all. I felt like as Louie was giving her presentation, that was the same for universal design. Obviously, you design for particular populations. It's good for all populations. And the funding resource is so timely. So thank you for that and so much else that you're doing at Everway. So now I'm excited to bring our full panel together to engage in discussion. But first, I'd like to ask Michelle Napick, who is the head of the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, an incredible longtime champion for all of us and for all the children, to reflect a little bit on what you're thinking. What are you thinking, Michelle, after hearing those comments?
Well, I don't want to get in the way of deeper conversation, but I have to say, for representing a foundation, a family foundation that has been 40 years in the space of learning differences, my heart is very full. Because when we first started out, the neuroscience wasn't there, this research wasn't there. I mean, the years and years of disbelief and resistance and denial against the notion of neurodivergent learners, the uphill battles for so long. Then we get this layer of research and really understanding the neuroscience, and now we're on this forefront of how it gets translated and applied with ed tech. What I liked, like the way I like to hold it though, is that we are not creating and supporting add-ons for teachers who are burned out and leaders who are having to make difficult decisions with dwindling resources, right? I keep holding this as like ed tech and AI as the integration amplifier. Like that's how I would like to see these. And we're hearing that all throughout the panel already. It's like we're accelerating early learning identification, right? We're expediting assessment and progress monitoring. We're personalizing interventions and suggestions for teachers more quickly because of the power of the tools to sift through the data that is coming at us. And you want to be able to apply it right now in the classroom tomorrow. That's what Tina's doing, right? And these are the ways that we're moving forward with that. Also, Nadine pointed to like this research then and ed tech, and it's pointing to other sectors like pediatricians and the medical world. It's also pointing to the bridge between school and home. And Carla, I actually just wanted to turn a question back around to you I know you're our moderator, but Sprout Labs came from the early bird, early screener research. And I think if you could add your voice right here about what we're seeing in the world of home supports for parents and primary caregivers, I think that would be really helpful to everyone too.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Absolutely. We were so excited to be in schools because it's so important to be where all the children are. But as a mom of a child who has dyslexia, who was diagnosed at 8, but I could have told you when he was 3, and there were 5 years in there when I was guessing. And I can tell you, we hear this story again and again and again from parents as they reach out to us. It's just incredible how few resources there are for parents to really get a sound assessment to tell them what's going on that doesn't take forever or cost thousands of dollars, and then to know what to do with it. And I'll tell you, parents are overwhelmed, they feel guilty, and it's not on them. We need to give them the help and the support that they need. And it's things as simple as saying, listen, we'll do an assessment, but also, why don't you send us the report you got from school? We'll help you make sense of this and pull it all together and give you the guidance that you need so that you make cost effective. And that's important because in this case, families often are having to spend their own money, cost effective solutions that will actually help that child. And we hear from these parents, my heart breaks for them every time we have one of these conversations. And particularly as you're hearing from families where a child, they know already an identification or a diagnosis, it's particularly helpful for them to get extra navigational support.
That's so important. And this research needs to continue. And I just want to underscore before we get back to our panel, the disruptions right now around funding for education resource are deep and serious and concerning. And I would just say any other funders who ever want to talk about what are the new partnerships that we can create for filling gaps until maybe the dust settles and we find out where government funding is coming back in for ed research. I think that is a door we need to try and continue to open right now. And I feel like researchers are also on the concern side trying to catch up with where the ed tech is sort of supplanting our brain building and where it's actually assisting without draining. And I think this panel is talking about all those things where it's really assisting. But I know, and it was in Ed Week and on another publication called Medium, the study coming out of MIT around ChatGPT and writing and it kind of being a drain to our brains versus the kind of AI we're talking about right now that is really assistive. I wonder if we could go back to Ola or Nadine and to talk a little bit about what they're seeing on what the research is then telling us about AI and what we're learning.
Yeah, we can't go very far in this conversation without talking about AI. So why don't we start with that? Let's talk about AI in education. What are you seeing that excites you? How is it particularly helpful for learning differences? What are your areas of concern? And sitting where we all do in this ecosystem, what should we be doing and thinking about that? Ola, if you want to start.
Sure. So I already mentioned some of kind of the promises of AI that I foresee, which is augmenting classroom instruction, helping kind of elevate the accuracy and robustness of assessments, potentially revealing new patterns in data in terms of understanding profiles of learners, because right now we kind of use this very dichotomous approach of, they have dyslexia, they don't have dyslexia, they have a particular disabilities, they don't. And part of it is maybe kind of our human inability to see this three-dimensional pattern, right? And try to understand what are the multifactorial profiles that emerge in learners and how can we accommodate those profiles. So I think what AI does best is taking very complex data and identifying some patterns that we can then use. For that to happen, we need to be really good about collecting this data, making sure the data is great, making sure we share the data, etc. But I think this is one of the important promises of AI. And so, so scalability in an individualized manner. We know that kind of the fidelity of implementation of instruction accounts for about 40% of outcomes, right? So we know that fidelity is a huge issue that we grapple with in the educational world. What always happens is we develop an amazing tool, whether it's an ed tech tool or it's just an paper pencil intervention. We go into the school, we implement the intervention, everyone is doing great. We leave the school, right? And a year later, everything falls apart, right? Like there's a lot of variability in how the interventions is implemented. And we know similarly with drugs, like if you don't take them as prescribed, like they're not going to work. And so that's a huge issue that I believe AI can help solve because AI can administer protocols with huge fidelity and a scalable manner, right? It can do it at scale. It can do as, a whole classroom at a time if needed, and it can do it in a fairly low resource kind of way. But, and there's a lot of but, we don't know still if it's effective, how effective it is. And in fact, I just want to flag one statistic that is only 10% of educational technology products have been evaluated using a rigorous approach. And so, and I think that by rigorous, this doesn't even mean like a fully, blind randomized controlled trials like we like to do, what we think is a really gold standard. So at 10%. And so my biggest fear is that we're going to kind of, and at that, industry, and especially with AI kind of, again, coming on board, is a billions and billion dollar industry. And so my biggest fear is, again, that we're going to have all of these tools, and and it's the development of these tools is faster than like the rigorous slow research to validate the implementation of the tools, the effectiveness of these tools, and does it actually improve kids' lives. And so this is kind of just a word of caution. This is like, I think, my biggest concern related to that. In terms of Michelle's point, like how does this affect brain development? I think we don't know yet, because there's some emerging evidence, some are positive, some again, is negative. I think it's probably has to do with a lot of moderating factors. What is the context? Who is the child or the adult? Who is the person, right? Like, what else do they have going on? What is the technology? How much? And under what circumstances? And so I think, again, kind of trying to do a lot of science around trying to kind of disentangle all of these contributing factors, rather than kind of taking one paper and saying, okay, well, listen, is showing, that our brains do poorly with using AI. Really kind of doing the systematic research we in education, cognitive science, really like to do before we make a conclusion about a particular process.
So true. So I'd love to invite everyone to come back on camera, back on mic, and just open this up. So we have questions about AI on the table, pros, cons, concerns, considerations, and chime in, you guys.
Well, I want to add to it. One of the things that I think we don't talk a lot about is the potential for discrimination, right? And so we talk about the biased algorithms, but we know that the data set is only as good as what it's populated with. And so if it gets data that's discriminatory, or it doesn't have an opportunity to have interactions with people who have a variety of needs. And in the US, 1 in 4 of us has a disability, right? And so this is not really a minority issue. This is a generalizable issue. And I think that we really have to pay attention to that. A term that I'm really starting to hear a lot, and it's really speaking to me as a person with a disability, is technology facilitated disability discrimination. And it's the way that our system is not designed to be accessible, to not think about the needs of everyone. And it's built around kind of the myth of average, right? For those of us that remember that old YouTube video. So I just want to flag that for the group in the conversation.
Yeah, I'll mention that there is a study, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on the name, and I will come up with it before the end of this, but there was a review of the large models and looking at the lesson plans that were created when people would enter in, and analysis using universal design for learning and then also universal design for transition demonstrated that those lessons and those learning opportunities were geared towards that elusive average. They didn't include. And so that's why, and I put it all in the chat, but there's a tool that I brought today to share with everyone. It's called LUDIA, but it's a completely free AI tool created by 2 passionate educators, Beth Stark and Jeremy Rostan, who will receive the 2nd Ann Meyer Design Award at the CastCon later on this month for this tool. But the point being that this is where you can go to receive information that is about lowering barriers for all learners, will help you identify what that, help you clarify what that goal is and identify those barriers. They also just released last week Easy LUDIA, which I also put the link in the chat. That bot is specifically designed to use universally accessible English so that it's even easier for translation. And it is also specifically designed to help educators who are in low resourced areas lower barriers for all learners. So both LUDIA and Easy LUDIA, I really encourage you to check them out. I also provided some sample introductory prompts for parents, teachers, and administrators. So even if you're like, I haven't even started with AI yet, I don't even know where to start, I've given you some initial prompts. They're very basic, but you can play with them and you can start to learn about what those are. So I'll stop there.
Louis, would you give us a quick example of an implementation of a case where one might use?
Oh gosh. I mean, you can ask it for anything. So if you are going to, let's go with this. You have early early learners and you know you're going to do some circle time and you're going to read a book out loud, and you know you have some learners who that's a really tough thing for them. They're not connecting to that experience of reading yet. You put in that description of that context and how you have that set up currently and say, how can I make this more accessible to all of my learners? And it's going to start helping you identify, some learners who may not do well on that rug during that read aloud session. And what are some supports you could provide for them? LUDIA is built to create a conversation. It's a chat. So you can continue to dig through and ask additional questions. So that's just one example.
That's unbelievable. So exciting. So I think Louis got us off on a good start here. I'd love to hear some specific examples of things that you are using, you think others should be using, you think are working. We can come back to cautions and concerns, but I know it's already out there in the world and we're using it. So what are you excited about? What are you using or recommending that others use?
I mean, I can be the first to admit that I've been using ChatGPT quite prolifically, and I think it's an amazing tool, both to kind of, for someone who is a second language writer, right, to review, for example, for typos or grammatical issues that might come up. I know that many individuals with dyslexia and other disabilities are already and have been relying on this for writing, for helping summarize, PDFs of articles. I know that, for a fact that students in my classes are using those. So I think we are all using them, and the kids are using them, and definitely individuals with disabilities. I think it's, and they say it in a positive way, because again, like you said, we have the cautions, we know that there are potential risks, but it is a tool that could help someone with dyslexia, for example, compose an email, which would otherwise be quite a challenging task within, a second, right? Or proofread something, or summarize a reading for a class, or whatever it is. So it's definitely a tool that's already kind of augmenting our learning and our day-to-day life.
Great. I couldn't agree more. I use ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity. I rotate between them. You get very different experiences with all of them. What other examples of technology enhanced solutions, doesn't have to be AI, have demonstrably improved outcomes for students with learning disabilities? Glenna, do you want to share any about, I know you all have a host of products that are very exciting. Do you want to share about anyone in particular that's been successful?
Definitely. So I have been using the read and write tool a lot. One of the things that I'm most interested in are things that move with me, right? So I want tools that will operate across platforms, that are safe, that are standard, that are easy to use. And so I like the read and write. I like the Orbit Note. They work across browsers. But I'm also thinking, as a former special ed teacher, I'm looking for that generalizable skill where I can take them from learning to work, and I'm not having to pull out a different tool, right? Depending on what setting I'm in. And so I was typing in an answer to a question at the same time, but one of the things that I want to make sure people know is that every state has an AT center that's federally funded, that usually has some different things that you can try out, some trials around assistive technology. State education agencies generally also offer some supports, as do kind of larger districts as well. I think, as I've been reading the chat and the questions, one of the things we have to think about is safety and security of our data, as well as making sure that the tools are effective. And so one of the things that I think we have to be really careful about is to get into the research and have those conversations with other thought leaders, critical thought partners, IEP teams, and our professional colleagues. Again, as a teacher, I usually went for what was readily available and what was free, not always what was the best tool. And so that's why I think we need to make sure that we're being very thoughtful and strategic with how we're using those resources and how we're accessing them.
Yeah, I agree. And there is a comment about safety in the Q&A. And I would say what I feel as we hear this discussion is really a tension between the caution of delivering these technologies in an environment that's safe for children, in a way that's safe for children, versus speed. ChatGPT was introduced 2.5 years ago. Think about that. That is not a long time. That's the amount of time it takes to evaluate a new technology for a school and form a committee to think about it. So how do we balance those tensions, and how does one pick a technology? And I'd love to hear from Nadine thinking about like how one picks technology, how you evaluate technology, and Tina talking about as a school person, what do you look for when it comes down to choosing and implementing new technologies?
Yeah, I think, what worries me a lot is the lack of evidence in edtech, and it's still there. People develop tools, and I think most of them have really good intentions, and they really think it's working because it's based on some theory or some, or some anecdotes, or it may work in the 3 kids that they, tried it on. But without like rigorous evidence, and it doesn't always have to be a randomized control trial, it can be good evidence that looks like at prospective validity and reliability, etc. I think it's often missing in the field, and it's often also that it's not the scientists who develop the edtech, or there's often not scientists on edtech teams, and so I think that's a really big problem, because as a parent you have no idea, and as an educator you often also have no idea, and you go for the shiny ones or the big names or the ones that are the most expensive or the cheapest, right? So if you think about what kind of criteria you use if you have children in order to get the last app you downloaded, maybe your child even picked it, right? And so I think we need a lot more rigorous work in that space, and I think it has to start with like maybe punishing people who don't use evidence, or maybe incentivizing people who do. We need seals of approval. We need like institutes, like I put something in Q&A, like there's now an institute at UCI and other places that just focus on this. We need like a criteria, and we need people who actually use the criteria, similar to, and I think Ola put it also in the Q&A, like FDA, right? We need like a FDA type of approval for edtech, and I think without that it will just be the Wild West for many more years, and it's not going to help the kids. They may have a lot of fun with cute little characters, but if we don't know that it's actually working in a rigorous way, knowing, and not just, oh yeah, I saw them get much better, it will be really sad, because we invest a lot of money in it, in the development and the distribution and dissemination and implementation, but it's not gonna make a big difference.
And could I just add that it's not like we're not picking on educational technology. I mean, it's been an issue in educational research to practice pipeline, for decades, right? And we see kind of the cases, we see what it led to. We talked about the 30% proficiency literacy, right? This is kind of a direct outcome of the fact that whatever is happening in schools, is not often necessarily informed by what we know works best. We know how to teach kids how to read. That we've known for a while now. We know what needs to happen. And also, of course, like whenever we develop our materials and our approaches for education, it's also not often informed by implementational issues of what actually happens in school in the real world. And so this, bi-directional communication is often lacking. And we know the casualties, again, are 70% of kids are not proficient in literacy, even though we know and have known how to teach kids how to read for a while now. So again, it's not an educational technology issue. The reason we are also wary is because we know where it can lead, and we've seen it being implemented, and the kids who are the most vulnerable are the kids who ultimately suffer the most from this, right?
And when we're looking at different tech tools to bring into our school to support our students, we we first look to the evidence base. What is the evidence base that that tech tool has? Has there been any research done with that tool and with the students? And then if we are able to see that, then we think about adoption, right? Like, and the impact on teachers and the impact on students. And is it going to support the structure of our programming, or is it something that's not going to really connect with that? We really have to look deep into these tools. Yeah.
I teach a class, every year for the Huxley students here at Harvard. And I give them a number of edtech tools, and then I ask them to evaluate them. And some of them are so prominent, so big names. Everyone's like, oh, this is going to be a good one, right? And then if you teach them to like rigorously evaluate them and see like who did the research, who like signed up on the research, who actually analyzed it, who paid for it, if you do that, like who's on the board,
How
like
many kids were
yes, exactly. How many kids? What are there actually kids that you want, like, or is it like some adults, or was that maybe studied an Alzheimer's patient and not, or an ADHD, but now works for dyslexia? Who knows? And they're shocked, and on purpose I use the big names, and so there's really not a lot of evidence in edtech. So I encourage everyone to really try to like be more careful with what goes into their homes and in their classroom.
And when you think about implementation science, like that whole go slow to go fast, right? We want to don't pick things really quickly just because you think that it's the most important, the biggest name, but going slow and taking your time and reviewing all of that is where you're going to see the outcomes, this positive outcomes for your students.
And we did have a question earlier about how do you get district buy-in to the onboarding on this? What's your experience on getting that buy-in? Any of you?
Yeah.
So we have a number of criteria identified, and I put also a resource in. So there's so many different levels, but one really important one is like working as a team of all stakeholders, right? It doesn't work if you just do it top down, and it doesn't work if you do it bottom up, and it doesn't do if just one person decide or one group of people decide we need to have this. But really preparing the community, including parents, including special educators and specialists and general educators, etc. Why are we implementing this tool? What is the goal with the implementation of this, and how is it going to be implemented, and how is it going to help or inform all of the stakeholders, and that includes parents, and that could even include kids depending on the age. And so that's one thing we found was really, really important, to make sure you do enough professional development before you even start introducing the tool, to make sure everyone is excited about it and understands why this is actually making it's going to make such a big difference in the community. There's many more, but I sent some resources in it.
And I think, to echo what Michelle was saying, this is not a tack on and not an add-on. If you're approaching it the right way, you're getting that broad stakeholder buy-in, you're seeing how it attaches to the core of what you're doing as an educational institution. There's also a comment in the Q&A that says we have to remember that we have to consider if the tools are married to the state standards. And then also suggesting that the companies hire educators with a deep and comprehensive understanding of the standards. It's important to tie that together. There's also a question here about what are some proven advocacy strategies or policy examples that have successfully held states and school districts accountable? And this is interesting. I think you think I'm going to say accountable for making sure that there's evidence-based selections, but I'm really what the comment really says is for making for choosing to move things along more quickly, decisions like this, implementing new technologies. So what are you all seeing in that? And again, it comes back to that caution versus speed discussion.
Right. I'm happy to start and then turn it over. But I think what's fascinating is we have lots of laws out there about accountability, right? We have reporting on how students are doing, on state assessments, on national assessments. We have state standards that have to be met. All of those things are in place. What we forget to do, though, is kind of step back and look at the bigger picture. Like, what are all of these things geared to do, and what is the ultimate outcome that we want? And for me, working on behalf of children with disabilities, when I think about the intent of IDEA, it's to prepare students for life after school, right? For college and career readiness, or as we say, like post-secondary education and independent living. It's all that same concept. So I think that one of the things that we need to do is step back and say, how are we preparing our students, and how are they exiting our school system, and what are they prepared to do, and is it meeting our needs? And if it's not, how can we use technology to help bridge that and make it go faster and improve those outcomes? Starting the conversation there, I think, gives us the leverage with the policymakers, with parents, with community members, and then funders. And then look at how do we allocate our resources that get there. One of the things that I talked about at the very beginning was the educator shortage, but what we're not talking about is how can we reduce and remove some of the overload that we're heaping on our educators so that they can focus their time and attention on the things that really matter to students. And I think this is a way that we need to look at technology differently, not just as a tool for students, but how do we reduce the workload of teachers so that they're focused on implementation?
Yeah, I'm so excited about voice AI as part of the solution for reducing time. And I'd love to hear you, Ola and Glenna, whoever else is working in voice. When we first looked into it, and it was 2018, there were very few that were focusing on children's voices, much less at the phonemic level. That was a real technological challenge for us, that we couldn't even find vendors that were willing to focus on this. Now I think it's table stakes for ed tech publishers to be able to do this, for researchers, as you're doing, to be able to do this. And that's just one example, Glenna, I think, where you can leverage, you can save so much time and scale a technology by virtue of having it be voice. And with all the AI movement, everything's moving to voice anyway. I don't know if you have experiences from voice that you want to share. Either of you, any of you?
Sure. Yeah, I think I've already mentioned kind of earlier that we launched this competition. I shared the link to basically showing that if you do train some of the kind of existing models in child speech data, they do better in scoring speech data from diverse learners, which kind of to the English language learner question, it is a big issue with screeners, is it's often unclear kind of live to educators if a child is making a mistake. For example, is it because they're English language learners? Is it because they truly are just at risk for literacy difficulties? What about accents? What about dialects? It's all of the tools we have are not kind of flexible in dealing with all of this. And so I think we as a field moving to kind of sharing our data, collecting good data on diverse learners, point taken from someone else, I can't remember who the panelist mentioned that, but sharing data from diverse learners and really training our existing tools that are really good at adult data, training them on this data. And we know that this can really push the needle very quickly in terms of improving the accuracy of those speech-based tools. Another kind of technical development that I think could help kind of with the teacher load question is data visualization. Many fields struggle quite a bit or think about and innovate quite a bit in that space. So how can we take data, complex data, and visualize it in a way that's easier to interpret and make a decision based? And for some reason, this conversation is kind of like absent from the education space, as far as I know. Maybe someone can correct me. But this is one kind of area we're also thinking about, but really, I think would help teachers if you can quickly access your child's data in a way that is designed to optimize your instructional decision making. That I think would help, really relieve that burden quite a bit. And I don't know if I have time for the advocacy response. Okay.
please.
In terms of how to get districts to move on things, what I found is that it is very, very difficult. With just like advocacy hat on, which I've done for like early years in my local district, as well as like Nadine, I know did a lot of work on this, in both on the state and the federal level, and I helped her a little bit with that as well. But on the local level, what I found is really trying to partner with administrators in a not like an expert way, but just like I'm here to help you as a resource. I also found that parental advocacy in terms of electing candidates for school boards or school committees that are aligned with, for example, science-based evidence. What we did is for when there was a local school committee election, for example, we put a slide with the literacy performance data for the district, and we asked the candidates, how do you interpret this graph? Can they take data on a graph and make conclusions based on that? And if they can't, should they really be on a school committee, right? Deciding like governing our administration. And so I think, so basically as a parent, advocating, electing candidates that are aligned with the goals and evidence in education, but also offering yourself as a resource and trying to kind of be the person linking, I think, the experts or the research and the evidence with the administrators, just kind of actively pursuing those links and persistently pursuing those links.
Thank you for reminding us. We can all play a role in this at the state, local district, local community level, all the way up. Thank you so much for reminding us. One thing I'm remiss in my duties, you saw a poll flash up on the screen. The staff at CGLR are very committed to reading that and shaping their work in webinars in the future for the better based on your feedback. So please, before you leave, take a few minutes, and it is just a very short poll to give your feedback. I'd love to ask everyone, just sort of take a round. What's the one thing you want to leave this audience with? And it can be a research finding, it can be advice, it can be your favorite technology that you're seeing in the district level, on the home front for education for children with learning differences. What is it that you want us to know and remember? And I'll let somebody raise their hand and go first. Who's ready?
I can go first. And so I think one thing we have not discussed at all is the social emotional aspect of a learning disability, right? So we can use all the ed tech in the world and make them better reader or better mathematicians, etc. But if they, come out of this journey with like, depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems, what did we really gain with introducing ed tech? And so I think, in the future, EdTech needs to incorporate this. And so there's been some really great research showing that, for instance, intervention is much more effective if you pair it with like an anxiety program for learning disabilities. And so I've seen this a lot, work in like classroom interventions, but I think, this could also be, entered into the EdTech space. And so it needs very careful approach, but I think we cannot forget that, we're not trying to create an army of academics that are all like superior readers and mathematicians, but we create little humans that are happy and healthy and have good mental health. And so I hope we forget this, that we won't forget this.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
I think this was in the article that you shared with us. One of the things when you're looking at ed tech, you want to think about, does it augment your thinking or replace it? And also that when you do choose an ed tech tool, students have to be taught directly how to use it. I think that's really important. A lot of teachers are afraid of ChatGPT because their students are producing, full written products. And I think that if students were taught more about how to use it, so it wasn't, replacing their thinking, it would be more helpful.
Yeah, just kind of to add on those amazing points already, I think not having the conversation or framing the conversation as like, do we need educational technology, or like, should we go with AI or not? I think framing the conversation like we are going with AI, that ship has sailed. How can we optimize, right? And how can we make sure that we optimize learning and social emotional outcomes and all of the things in the context of the fact that this is happening. The AI revolution is here, it has arrived, it happened. How do we move forward? I think it's helpful because I've been stuck at like with many conversations about like, should we do AI or not? But like, how should we do it? I think should be the moving forward kind of discussion.
I'll piggyback on this through that lens of universal design for learning. So it's a framework that we use to design any kind of an educational environment, and that includes when we're educating our teachers. So it's used not only for our preschool, K-12, it's higher ed, it's on and on. And touching on what Nadine just said, and Tina and Ola, is that we need our teachers to receive the kind of support. And we think about engagement within universal design for learning. So that affective network, that's what we're talking about, right? That's that social emotional. It's not about making things whiz bang. And remembering that as we're bringing these tools and introducing tools and opportunities to our educators, that they are provided the same type of high quality learning experiences that we're also seeking to have in our classrooms. And I'm a little biased, but I think that's why we use UDL.
I concur with everything that's been said. And I also want to remind us that the most powerful force that we have is our collective commitment to every learner's potential. Research has shown, right, and continues to show that when we combine evidence with accessible technology and the expertise of educators, right, who pull together all of those things, and we do that in true partnership with families and communities, that there's no limits to what our students can achieve. I think that we're going through a great deal of turmoil in our education system right now with policies, with funding, with changes to the structure. And we really need to pay attention to what's working and what needs to be put in place and continued for our most vulnerable populations, right? Our children with disabilities, our youngest learners, our students who are English learners, all of those things. We need to make sure that we're leveraging this technology with the research and those communications to make sure that they continue to access grade level rigorous content. And that's bringing in everything that everyone's talked about today. But it's not just about some learning, it's about grade level learning. It's about rigorous content and the depths of knowledge and giving them an opportunity to really be successful.
Fabulous. Well, thank you all. This has been an incredible discussion with incredible panelists. Thank you to Michelle Napick, the Tremaine Foundation, and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And turn it over now to Emily.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say a quick thank you. This has been such an incredible opportunity to bring together like the top experts on learning disabilities, children who learn differently, plus technology. So thank you so much for coming together. Thank you, Carla, for your awesome moderation, for having that really interactive conversation. We are so grateful. Thank you to our audience for your great questions and to all of our speakers for answering the questions. I've already posted information in the chat about our upcoming sessions for the rest of our Tech Enhanced Teaching and Learning Month, and then following that with our GLR week. So please, please come back and join us again. And thank you again to all of our awesome panelists today. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.